Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and we are really excited to be here today for the final Thursday of this Pride Month. And with that, I'm going to bring Jean Marie Nevada in to host today's conversation.
Jamie.
Hi.
It is the final one. Look, I brought back the unicorn to do it.
Yay!
The final one, I ran out of rainbow tiaras. I had to do this. It's a kind of a retro look. But I think we have enough excitement that I don't need to unicorn the entire time. So
well, I have my birthday cup, which says, "In a field of horses, be a unicorn." So I'm feeling some pride today too.
See, we're able to do it. We still have a lot more as we go into weeks 4 and 5 of Pride. Thank you, Jamie. We will talk to you in a little while. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and her, or if you speak Spanish, ella. And every single week we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. We invite a few guests, and this week I'm always excited, but this week I'm super excited because I'm nerding out again, people. We are going to be talking about inclusion in comic books, specifically around the DC Pride edition that just came out this June. And to have the conversation and to talk about this historic issue, we have two of the artists who contributed to this issue, and we're going to bring them in now. First, Amy Reeder and Trung Lin Nguyen, who also worked on the book. Hey, Amy. Hey, Trung. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm very excited and super hyper. And how are you doing, Amy?
Hi, Jean Marie. I'm doing great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. So I wanted to just start with this question for both of you. How did you end up coming into this project and being invited to do the work? And maybe, Trung, we can start with you and then talk to Amy.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked with James Tiny in the Fourth and Aditya Bidikar, our letterer, and we had worked together before on some of James's smaller kind of personal projects. And so I think just through networks of comic professionals who kind of like, we sort of like know who all the other queers are. And so we sort of just connected. And I think James sort of requested me through his editors, and then one of the editors reached out. And so I got to hop on and do a Batwoman for DC Pride. I was so excited about it.
It's so fabulous. And I just like the idea of like this network of queer comic book creators out there. That just made me very happy to even think about. And Amy, what brought you into the project?
Editor Andrea Shea, I think she was pretty heavily involved in the book, if not the main editor. So she just asked me if I was available, and she had this great script by Mariko Tamaki that was just like so great about Harley and Ivy. I don't know. It was such an entertaining read, and I had to do it. I knew that somebody had to do it right, so I decided it would be me.
You both totally got it right. They're pretty spectacular. The whole book is spectacular. Those two pieces are spectacular. So I want to talk a little bit about the centering of queer characters in comics, because, it is June. It's Pride Month. We are all up to our eyeballs in rainbows. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, it really makes us hyper aware of our own community and the presence of people around us in ways that maybe the 11 other months we don't see quite as much. So what does it mean to you to see issues like this? Because this is still a relatively new thing. I mean, we did not grow up with comic books that looked like this. And do you think that this has the ability to engage new readers who maybe wouldn't have necessarily looked at comics? And maybe, Trung, we can start with you.
Sure. No, I don't know that I could, like you said, I certainly didn't grow up with anything like this. And so I don't know how it would strike me as a reader. I know as a creator, I'm very excited for the opportunity to be able to engage with my queerness and with my kind of nerddom in this way. I always find that to be very exciting, but I don't know if, I don't want to like oversell the possibility that someone would be able to, like a young person, a young reader would see this and, see themselves reflected in it. And I think that's really important. But I don't quite know what that experience is like as a reader, because I sort of came into kind of like consuming queer content to the extent that they're available today, more or less as an adult. So I'm really excited to kind of get feedback and find out what folks think about this sort of queer visibility this way. I'm excited to hear more about it.
Excellent, excellent. And Amy, what about you? How do you feel about this centering, and do you think that this does work in sort of bringing people along?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can at least say for myself that when I read and watch stories about queer characters, particularly two girls together, or yeah, it just it usually really warms my heart, and I'm smiling afterwards, and I feel more in love with my girlfriend, and I don't know, it just always puts me in a better mood. I wish I could be cool and be like, oh, it's all the same, and I can identify with everything, but like, yeah, it's nice to see that representation. It's even more than feeling included. It's like everybody loves love, pretty much, right? And so, yeah, wouldn't you want to, if you're, let's say that you're straight and you're watching this, like, wouldn't you want to see yourself in the characters? And so that's really exciting. And I hope that it affects people who are reading it. I tend to think that with stories, like the very nature of watching or reading stories, we're basically empathizing with the person there. It's just like automatic. So I think it's really important that when we consume stories, that we are consuming things that are about people who are maybe not necessarily even like us or could be us. But yeah, really important to learn to empathize with lots of different people. So I hope that a lot of people enjoy this, and that it doesn't just kind of seem like it's only for queer readers. But at the same time, I really hope that it makes people happy.
I have to say the Harley-Ivy relationship in this story is something for us all to aspire to. I mean, so much chaos, so much love at the same time. I kind of loved it. And the U-Haul reference, which I will never, ever forget. So, all the characters in this issue are primarily queer identified in one way or another. And there's always been a lot of conversation about how that happens, how it happens through the art, how it happens through the writing, how it even happens through the way this content is publicized. So, as creators who are trying to incorporate queerness into it, what is your approach to doing this? Because there is that idea that, we could just sort of mention in passing that somebody happens to be in a same-sex relationship, for example. But what are the ways that you went about making sure that it was incorporated through the story and through the characters, as opposed to sort of that passing nod to somebody's queer? And whoever wants to jump into that one first would be perfect.
Well, I would say that when I was designing Harley and Ivy for this story, I guess when I had first heard about them being an item, admittedly, I didn't really know the backstory of like how there were little hints to that in years past, but I couldn't really see it. I was like, well, I'm having a hard time seeing how they would have chemistry. And so, and especially because like it seemed especially that Ivy was wearing a lot of clothes that felt like they were to attract men. And so when I was designing them, I was trying to think of younger queers because, I'm an old fart now. I'm 40 and like I don't and so I was trying to think of younger styles because usually these days, like I'm proud to say that queer ladies and that we're pretty good at fashion. Yeah, and I tried to give Ivy this angle of being kind of witchy because I felt like, oh, well, that would actually make more sense. That would be something that like Harley would think was really hot, and like she's more subtle to kind of be a good foil to Harley. So she's kind of more natural looking and more what's the word? Just like organic, which is good for her in the first place. So yeah, that's how I tried to think of it. I mean, I feel like, anything can be believable, but yeah, I don't know.
I'm actually really glad that you mentioned that because it was one of the things that I noticed when I was looking particularly at Ivy. I was like, oh, that's a different look. And I kind of noticed that there was a bit of a switch. So I'm so excited that was intentional. And so, Charles, for you, what does the incorporating look like? So the way it is, again, part of and not sort of this, oh, and by the way kind of thing.
Sure. I guess I don't think about incorporating queerness with quite as much intentionality as far as aesthetics. Like, I know that there's a lot of like wink and nudge history in terms of queer media. And so it's something that I kind of like have always taken a little bit for granted. And so I don't know how to employ them with like an intentionality, because it always feels a little bit to me like, oh, I don't want to be instructive, because there are so many different ways to be queer. And there are so many ways to be queer that that kind of fall outside of the ken of my own experience. And so I don't want to pretend to be an authority on that at all. But one of the things that I sort of did the opposite thing that Amy did, where I did not look to like kind of contemporary young people, because my work just looks like it kind of comes out of like a very, very old space to begin with. And so everything looks a little bit old and aged. And so a lot of the queerness in the storytelling, like I exist in this space where I kind of want to reappropriate imagery from times where I could not see myself, and sort of like make that, like sort of rope that in and make that a part of today's queer dialogue. So I wanted to, like, I tend to like to tell stories about queerness and latch onto stories that other creators have sort of like where other creators have incorporated queerness, and illustrate them in a way that makes them feel like queerness has always been present, because it's true, and to be able to make it explicit now is such a wonderful thing. And so I've gone ahead and sort of like really leaned into the Alice in Wonderland turn of the century children's book illustration aesthetic for like sort of this dark psychological thriller story that the Batwoman story is. So that tends to be my take on things, where I'm just going to do things exactly as I like kind of want the characters to inhabit this world where queerness is an important part of their existence, and maybe not always the center, but like that always is something that has a bit of gravity to the way that they navigate those spaces. And I wanted to make those experiences look beautiful and important.
And, and I think that really does make the case for when you have diverse creators who are all bringing in different perspectives, this naturally comes through. We don't see sort of that put upon forced insertion of diversity and forced insertion of difference, because the creators themselves are approaching it as it is part of my identity, it kind of gets incorporated into that. Do you think there are any things that other creators should be thinking about when they are working on projects like this? So for allies out there, maybe who are working on inclusive projects, how would you, if you were giving advice, what would you say that people should be thinking about? Should they be asking questions? Should they be talking to people? Do you have any suggestions? Because Amy, you talked about sort of looking around, whereas Trung, you did the opposite. Do you think that would be important for people who want to be in this space with us?
I would say, yeah. Like, I think I've done this a little bit, in situations where I'm representing myself, but also like I try to add inclusion in other ways. And so I would say, like, definitely make sure that you're including people of color. And there's a lot of like intersectional things that you can do that include people that haven't been tried yet, just an example is like, I'm an ex-Mormon, and I found out that there was a whole lesbian ex-Mormon group, and I didn't even know that. And it's really funny because it's just so oddly specific. I didn't know that I needed that my whole life, There are just like these specific experiences that you get with that uniqueness. And so I think it's really important to come up with a character who's really unique and not an archetype, and also to observe what people are doing, but not necessarily do it the same way. You've now seen what the trends are, so try and do it a different way. Like, for instance, like the L word really shaped the way that I feel like lesbians kiss now on TV. It's like literally they just reference the L word, and there's always like one girl just leaning over the other one, all lanky, like to be like Shane, And I don't think that that's how everybody kisses, but they still do on TV. So yeah, I don't know. That's just a little bit of advice, and just obviously exposure to people, using inspiration from real life, because we're everywhere.
I like the ominous way, and that was kind of sad. You never know. Trung, anything that you would talk to, content creators who are outside of the community, who are seeking to sort of be more inclusive? Anything you would say to them that they should be paying attention to?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I really love what Amy said about this sort of being a dialogue, that we sort of like reference things that we're familiar with, and so it becomes a part of the texture of the queer universe that we all occupy. And that sort of like colloquial way of building like instances of queerness is something that I think is really important, because the ways that we express ourselves and the ways that we identify ourselves and talk about ourselves evolves enormously over not very long periods of time. And so, you know, whatever it is that we're doing now is going to seem dated a little while later, and that's totally fine to revel in the moment that you're in, I think. As far as with, you know, allies writing, you know, queer characters or like characters of color, one of the things that I tend to like to think of in terms of like any dialogue on diversity and inclusion within like kind of corporatized storytelling spaces is that you get dialogues about representations about character, which is really important for younger readers because they see characters that they can relate to and that are like themselves, and that's so important. But as you get older, the dialogue sort of shifts to, okay, but are there queer personnel being hired? And so when I think about diversity, I often think about it in terms of like, this is a personnel issue. And so if you just have enough people in a room, you get people to have a sort of dialogue so that we can kind of go back and forth and facilitate a little bit more of a thorough discussion about what makes our experiences. And there's all kinds of hesitation. Like, I know a lot of really well-intentioned folks are like, well, is it all right for me to write to write outside of my experience? And I've been thinking about it in terms of, there's been this sort of shift in the dialogue about the own voices hashtag among books and storytelling, and its uses and the ways that it sort of problematizes and has a complex relationship with, you know, like creators who kind of exist at the margins. And that conversation has sort of really led me to this space where I think I'm currently thinking about things in terms of, well, if there are people in my life who are unlike me, like if there are like queer people, trans people, lesbians, if they exist in my life, if they're people that I love, they deserve to exist in my imagination. I need to include them in my stories. And it's important to be able to do that, and to do it in a way where you are not exerting some sort of sense of authority over their experiences, I think is that sort of subtle fine line. So like, I think writing the other is such an important thing. You're expressing to the world that you hold space for these people in your heart and in your imaginations, and then like trying to make sure that you're being respectful, and not sort of like trying to position yourself as an authority figure over their experiences, is the sort of that precious little area that I think folks are really trying to aim for. And that really, like, that process is going to be messy, and it's going to require just a lot of talking to other people and getting it wrong and then sort of like doing better later. And I think letting go of that sense of preciousness and being able to sort of mess up and move forward is really integral to the creative process.
I love that. And I have to say, just sitting here and listening to this as somebody who's been reading comics my whole life, you kind of didn't even know that you were going to get to this point in some ways, that this is such a fascinating discussion to actually be having. And I think it just says so much about how creators have pushed the envelope, but also how some of the consumers have been more vocal about their demands. Before we went on air, we were talking about being at comic book conventions and how passionate the fans can be about stuff, and how I think a lot of them have really pushed for this. So, you know, I personally think that issues like this one, you know, for the queer kids who are buying their comics, you know, on Tuesdays, you know, they're really excited, and when they see things like this, but we see it as, you know, it's the pride issue. Do either of you have comments about how consumers of this kind of media can continue pushing it? Obviously, go out and buy your comic books, which is really important, and consume the media and pay for the media for which you are consuming. But do you have any other recommendations about how people can really be vocal about saying, I want to see more of this? Because, you know, PFLAG, we represent queer people, but we also represent all of our families and allies. And that's a lot of people and a lot of voices and a lot of consumers. So do either of you have any input on that?
I'll let Trung start.
Okay. All right, so this is slightly off the cuff then. I haven't had a lot of time to think about this. I think like one of the things that I've noticed that's sort of been on my mind is that I think that marginalized creators are often sort of like the ways that we go about telling our stories is held to a higher standard of scrutiny than, you know, straight creators who are kind of trying to approximate our experiences. There's a little bit more leeway there for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why. And I think a part of it has to do with the fact that like the representation of this variety and of this kind of focus at this level of celebration is something that's relatively new. And so there's a sense of preciousness. People are really eager to like make sure that we do everything right from the get. And that's not that's something that like that's sort of the strange kind of thing that we're a luxury that we're not really afforded like as queer creators to like make mistakes about our own experiences. And so I think for consumers, and I myself as a consumer, my habit is to yes and whatever it is that I'm consuming. And so like if I'm getting queer content, oh, it doesn't like entirely gel with my experience, but like if I am supportive of this, maybe I can push for more. And so there's just this like, oh, like I'm not seeking to be perfectly represented on the page. I am excited to see more people kind of within my ken represented, and I'm going to do my best to support that, whether or not it sort of gels within my realm of experience or not. And I think that's something that I'm sort of trying to center as someone who reads comics.
I love the concept of yes and, because it is frustrating when, you know, you think you've done all this work on it and it may not seem like enough to some people. And I mean, and particularly in this issue, we're looking at a really wide variety of queer experiences. It was certainly not just binary gay and lesbian people. I mean, there was really diverse representation. Amy, any thoughts that you have on how people can push for more of this or sort of be more vocal in helping content like this happen more often and make it more of a year-round thing?
Yeah. You know, I mean, I guess the reason why I was a little stumped is that I feel like the reaction to this has been really good. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it will happen because of that. Like, I don't really see that becoming a problem, which is so great. So I guess like after that initial hump, just to continue your enthusiasm, and it doesn't have to be for everything, but like when you like something, be vocal about it. Again, try, like, this sort of thing doesn't just need to be consumed by queer people, and it's probably better if it's not. Yeah, expose your kids to it. I don't know. Yeah.
Use it for conversations too. I mean, I think this is such an easy tool to start a new conversation. So I have to ask both of you this question because it would just be so remiss if I didn't. Who were the creators that influenced you as you were coming up as artists? Because again, we are still working in a time where at the ages that we are, there were not necessarily a plethora of artists out there and creators out there always to look at. So where did your influences come from, especially now that you are one of those people who could influence younger creators who are coming up?
You know, I guess like my first influence was really manga as a generality, because that's how I saw it when I first saw it, was just kind of as this monolith. Yeah, like I started getting into Sailor Moon and stuff like that, and I'm trying to think what else. I say this all the time, but like I'm a big fan of Sophie Campbell, who is actually a trans woman, and like her stories have always really blown me away with just their braveness when it comes to taking time on the characters and really like just like bringing you down into it. And yeah, and she has a illustration in the book as well, Harley Ivy illustration. Yeah, like she just has this ability, because she writes and draws, to just like slow your brain down and really get you to focus and have like that confidence. Like I like to just kind of flash bang stuff to keep people's attention, but ironically, like this is the sort of thing I like. So yeah, she's just very good at capturing characters, making them super duper unique, which again is a really, if you want to think about inclusion, just make sure that your characters are really specific. That's a really good trick. If you need an easy trick, then that's the one. Like, you know, it's like give them a personality that have some things that are completely unrelated to the thing that you wanted to do to include them. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of my inspiration, I would say, is just kind of the general manga vibe mixed with reality. I don't know. This is a really dumb answer. I would have thought more about it if I had another chance. If I could rewind all of this like Superman and then do it all over again, I'd probably say something different.
We could do it on an alternate version of Earth, of course.
Okay, cool.
It's always an option for us. It's the conversation is happening differently somewhere right now. And Trunk, who did you go to? What kind of influences did you have?
I always have such difficulty answering this question because I came into comics on accident. I really did not intend to make comics as an adult. And so I came out of like looking at a lot of children's books, and I realized as an adult that a lot of the creators that I latched onto as a kid turned out to be queer. They like would either come out later in life because the like book illustration, like as an industry, was something that was very conservative, and they were making things for children, and so they couldn't come out. And so I loved like Tommy DePaola's books growing up. I loved the ways that he did texture and color and the accessible ways that he composed pages. And, you know, he came out very, very late in life. I think like just in the last year of his life, kind of publicly. And that really took me aback. And I was like, oh, so you've always been here. Another illustrator that I've always loved is Trina Shart-Hyman, who I believe is also queer. And she died in like 2008. And her work, like she illustrated a lot of fairy tales. She did an iteration of St. George and the Dragon that I still think about to this day. She drew Swan Lake with Margot Fontaine. So it was just like a lot of like children's book authors who've kind of always been present and sort of made themselves and made their stories and the ways that they kind of construct their images sort of available as a space of safety. And I still get to look back on these folks fondly because I can think of them as like, oh, like you were part of my queer community, I just didn't know it. And then coming into comics, like I think that I came into comics at a time where all of these conversations had just started happening with a lot of seriousness. And so I'm a little bit spoiled. I have always had like comic book contemporary, like kind of queer folks who have sort of like made moves to make this space something that's possible for me to do. So I have like a kind of a mixed bag of experiences, but like there's a lot of different folks and a lot of different influences that have contributed to how I get to tell these stories.
And I think it's so exciting because right now you are those artists who are influencing someone else who, 10 years from now, maybe even less than that, is going to be doing this, because now there are these actual out creators that we are starting to see more and more. So one last question, and I know this always gets asked of artists, but we do have a lot of young people who do watch this and tune into this. So if you are a queer creator, do you have any sort of advice on surviving and getting out there and pushing your work? Because so many people want to do it. So many people are competitive, but a lot of people just don't know what it takes and how to do it. So for our young queer people out there who aspire to do exciting stuff like this, what do you have to say to them?
Well, of course, do it safely, but I found that finding peers online was really helpful who were like-minded. And I should mention, like, I didn't see myself as queer for a long time. So actually I'm backtracking, I'm ruining everything, but like I'm backtracking because I realized that my inspiration is really the younger artists that are coming in. They've really changed the medium. Before that, I was kind of a novelty as a woman in the industry and as somebody who had a more effeminate style, I guess. And I was trying to push a lot of that stuff down. And now I'm getting to see so much stuff, and I'm suddenly like, oh, I can do that? I could have done that all along, so I feel like it's actually like young people that are inspiring me a lot and making me realize that now's the time. I hope people haven't forgotten about me because I want to do cool stuff like they're doing. So anyway, yeah.
I feel similarly to Amy, actually, because I think that most young folks like know how to navigate this space better than we did when we started. So I'm like, Yeah, so I'm like, I think you guys got this, but like, like the broadest advice that I can give sort of younger artists is, like you really can, like, there's room for your very specific point of view. Like Amy's focus on like characters being very specific is so important because oftentimes that comes out of really particular experiences from creators as well, and you can't be afraid to like own those experiences and reveal yourself a little bit on the page, because that kind of is what makes you special and kind of what makes art directors and editors know that you are coming from a place and you have something to say. So like be specific, like Amy said.
I love that. I love that. Thank you both so much. This was the biggest treat, the end of our Pride Month shows. I can't think of anything more exciting than this. So thank you both for your contributions, and thank you for spending some time with us today. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Jean Marie.
Bye. Well, everybody, I am nerding out in a big way. I can't even control myself anymore. I need to stop. We need to stop. We've run out of time, but we will be back next week. We are doing a great show, and it might be about disco. So you definitely want to be there with your disco ball. As we wrap up the same way every single week, we want to remind you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. And please, if you haven't been vaccinated yet, it's time to go. And get your vaccination and be fair to everybody else. Take care of yourselves. Visit us at pflag.org if you need any help, and we will see you next week on Something to Talk About Live. Bye, everybody.